Hello, welcome to this edition of the umgoblue.com podcast. This is Phil Callihan along with
Clint Derringer.
On this edition of the umgoblue.com podcast, we're going to talk about the current Michigan quarterback situation as spring practice progresses, which assistant coaches are under extra scrutiny, how Michigan's culture makes it different from other major programs, Ohio State, Alabama, Ohio State talk around Schembechler Hall, and how J.J. McCarthy is a shadow and an inspiration over the program and hangs over Bryce Underwood as he comes in to take the mantle of Michigan's next starting quarterback. Well, Clint, how do you feel about the news out of Schembechler Hall that quarterback Mikey Keene is being held out of practice?
Well, I think that he was the biggest challenger to Bryce Underwood for the starting position. We've heard that the reps are kind of balanced amongst the competitors, but with one fewer competitor in the mix, then you have to assume that either those are getting distributed evenly or they're going to Bryce.
It's a feeling, that the guy that's making the most plays, that has the command of the offense and command of the team, because it can't just be the offense, it's got to be both sides of the ball. So we'll know whenever that happens. Not in a rush to make that decision. So it's been a great competition so far, but it's been awesome to watch those guys. They just they're so together. It's a room that's really together and that understands it and support each other, which is really cool to see.
I think either way, it's fine. Again, spring reps are all about everybody kind of digesting this new scheme under Chip Lindsey and kind of seeing who can emerge as a leader in the locker room and in the huddle from a quarterback position. So it just makes it more likely that Bryce is going to jump right into the starting role. But I still feel the same now as I did last time we spoke, that if it's about executing football plays, throwing the ball, escaping the pocket, then Bryce Underwood will win the job hands down. But the questions for Bryce are about leadership, about being able to process the speed of the game mentally and make decisions that aren't going to create a lot of turnovers and put guys in harm's way and get himself hurt. So if he can handle all of that mentally from down to down and avoid big mistakes, then he's going to be the favorite to be the starter. The talent differential between him and the rest of the competitors is just that wide. So I think with Keene, out of the mix at the moment, as they get the enrollment and get him figured out on the roster, it just increases the probability that we see Bryce Underwood in game number one.
Well, the thing that concerns me is that when we look back at last season, the defense was able to maintain at a high level, and the quarterback situation was jumbled. And I think the positive thing this year is obviously Bryce Underwood, with everybody raving about him, right? We're hearing raves about him from practice.
He's come in and really done a nice job of kind of assimilating himself into the team, and he's all into our culture, and it's been a lot of fun getting to know him, but and really all the guys, but definitely a guy that we're excited about his future.
By him getting more reps, because Mikey Keene is currently out of the mix, Bryce is getting more reps heading into practice, every day, and it's kind of accelerating that development. And I think you're right. I mean, it's one thing to be able to make the throws. It's another thing to be able to lead the huddle. And either way, I feel a lot better right now than last spring, right? Last spring and heading into the season, lots of concerns. I think the concern I have right now is, we don't want to see a replay of last year. And with Mikey Keene being out for undetermined reasons, Michigan is very opaque in commenting. We just stopped hearing about him practicing all of a sudden, and rumors out of Schembechler Hall that he was being held out of practice. Then you have Davis Warren, who's rehabbing, And, so basically, the guys up are Bryce Underwood and Jaden Davis. And
Hmm.
it's interesting because last year, um, you know, Jaden Davis was not going to play. We had, that kind of filtered out that he was not going to play his first year. So he also wasn't available last year. So in a weird way, I think that the current situation is accelerating both Bryce and Jaden's development. And you just hope that whenever I go to Schembechler Hall and I see the parking lot, I always hope that nobody trips over a curb or anything, because what we had last year was very bad, right, at the quarterback situation. And so the first thing I thought is, a couple weeks ago, oh, we got Mikey Keene. He's kind of the steady guy with experience. And I told people had asked me, and I'm like, well, I think Mikey Keene's going to be the starter, but we're going to see Bryce, playing a lot, and then eventually, Bryce would take over. Well, with Mikey being, off the board right now it's a much greater likelihood of seeing Bryce, because honestly, since Jaden didn't play a lot last year, and even though he practiced, they're really kind of coming in my mind, kind of on an equal footing. So it's going to be one or the other, and you sure hope that nothing happens to one of them, in practice or in summer drills. So a little nervous, but everything we're hearing about Bryce is that he's the real deal.
Yeah, yeah, and that's we've seen him. We've seen him locally here, as a high school kid. We've seen him in the off season in 7-on-7s. The way he throws the ball is it's elite. He's the number one recruit in the country, for a reason. It's a really it's a different level of athleticism when you're talking at the very very top of not just quarterback recruiting but all of the recruits in the country. So it was never a doubt physically, who was going to have an edge. The question was whether Mikey Keene's game experience at the Division 1 level was going to give him an advantage and let him limit the mistakes. Very similar to the dynamic from 2021 with Cade McNamara being the starter, even though JJ was a far more gifted athlete. And we saw, Cade ran that offense effectively and got the team to a level playing championship football that turned the program around in 2021. That was adequate and adequate plus. But when JJ gained that experience also and got onto the same level mentally that Cade McNamara was in terms of a college starting quarterback, then his athleticism advantage kind of took over. So you're right that from an experience standpoint, Jaden Davis was not as far ahead of Bryce Underwood as a Mikey Keene would have been, because Jaden Davis also doesn't have that game experience. He's got a year as a college student, a year in the building, a year of working out, a year under Sharon Moore in the offensive system, but it's a new coordinator and a new quarterbacks coach. So almost both starting from ground zero next to each other. So you would just naturally assume that Bryce Underwood's physical gifts and advantage would put him ahead in that race. But you're right also that the added reps are going to be great for Jaden Davis. In terms of quarterback depth, it's great. And if we'll see how the whole quarterback battle kind of shakes out and how the season goes. But if um, Jaden Davis is not seeing the field by the end of the 2025 season, I'm still confident that he's going to be a starter level quarterback in the Big Ten or in the power conferences, even if he were to transfer. I think he's a really valuable asset in the quarterback room, without a doubt. And we'll see how the quarterback competition shakes out. Um, but you would think one of those two guys is likely to be, pushing for the starter's job going into next season in 2026, and the other is probably looking for playing time elsewhere. So we'll see how all that kind of develops.
Well, and it's interesting talking to some of the defensive guys about Bryce. they talk about how he runs around, and they talk about he's, just next level. And then there's, well, do you ever catch him? Have you hit him yet? And Rashawn Benny said this.
Nah, don't touch Bryce.
One of the interesting things is, as Michigan kind of reloads at the running back position, Jordan Marshall was just raving about watching Bryce play and comparing him to JJ.
Puts his head down and works. And when he came in for the bowl prep, he didn't say much, came in and worked, and now he's got that confidence, that swag that we all were looking for, that quarterback is supposed to have. And you love to see that when your guy has that swag. The quarterback has to have that. You saw it with JJ, with all the greats that came through. You see that swag, and again, I love watching him play ball. Like he knows, he's wise. He knows football. His IQ is next level, and I'm excited to play with a player like that.
And it's interesting because I think that's one of the things that is interesting about when people are talking about the quarterback position. JJ is mentioned reverently. And we have guys who still played with JJ, and everybody's aware of how he led the program. And I think one of the things that I think back to is not only did he lead the program, but he helped draw guys in, and he was that guy in the huddle. He had that leadership from a very early stage. Even before he was the starter, he was a leader. And I think that's one of the things we need to see if Bryce is able to do that. And, and you've alluded to that about leading the huddle, but I think it's important to lead the huddle and also be a leader, in the locker room.
Yeah, it's one of the intangibles that just comes with being the quarterback. There are different leadership styles. You don't have to be one particular type of leader by any means, but you do have to have command and kind of command the respect of the guys, because in the biggest moments in a game, when it's all kind of hitting the fan, somebody's got to be able to calm everybody down out there in the huddle on the field, right? The coaches can say so much from the sidelines or during timeouts, but from play to play, you need somebody that's kind of a calming presence and kind of infuses the rest of your players with confidence that they're going to execute the next play, especially when things are going sideways. You kind of think of the Rose Bowl in the 2023 season, and you and I, were pretty harsh on how poorly the offense played for the majority of that football game. But when they needed to score to tie and get into overtime, and they got to a 4th down and 2, there was still a calm sense on that team, and you saw that they executed a play pretty simply. They schemed something wide open, and it was an easy pass to Blake Corum for a huge gain that really made it the whole season, the whole national championship could have evaporated in that instant. So leadership in those moments is really what it's going to come down to, and that kind of trust gets built through repetition and kind of being under fire with those guys, and that's what the biggest challenge is going to be for any new quarterback into a program. A transfer, a freshman, or a redshirt freshman. All of those guys are going to have similar challenges to that. So the person who gets those game reps early in the season, really that's what they're doing, is building trust and confidence with the guys in the offensive huddle. So we'll see how that develops.
One of the things that JJ was crucial to was in helping establish the culture here. And you and I have talked the last several years about the culture that has grown around this Michigan program. Jim Harbaugh was central to it. JJ was central to it. And when we evaluate Jim in the grand scale of the pantheon of Michigan coaches, I think we're in a different stage right now. Obviously, he was able to build this program up, return them as a national champion. And then the next thing is, can the culture he creates endure through his people after he leaves. And it's interesting to hear, again, coming back to running back Jordan Marshall, just talking about what this team wants to do.
We always have a chip on Michigan. We always need to perform at a high level and execute, and that's why you bring a guy like Chip in, is to help us execute and to help us take this next step. And I'm excited to see what we can do this spring and carry it over to the fall and then into game time. I want to win a natty, so making sure everybody's on that same page to bring a natty back to Michigan.
JJ and Jim Harbaugh have been able to elevate that program to where, yes, you want to win the Big Ten, but the expectation and the goal is a national championship. And you hear the guys talking about it, openly. And this is the quote where he says, "I want to win a natty." And, you also have the thing where, you have Derek Moore saying, realizing that last year was a disappointment.
I got a lot of respect for Coach Moore, and I want to see him, do well here and be a great head coach here. And also, I love this place, and I just felt like my time here wasn't, ready to leave yet. So I had to talk to my family, Coach Moore, and I just said, I'm ready to just go all out this year, let my last year go with a bang, and just try to do everything I can to help get this program back to where we were before I got here.
So it's interesting that there is an acknowledgement that the defense is still at a very high level, okay? And the offense needs to pick it up. So, you have Jordan Marshall, who made a huge impact in that game versus Alabama. And then you have, Justice Haynes coming in. And it's interesting because he has a completely unique perspective because he came from Alabama, and he talks about the difference in the programs, about
every program has its differences and the different ways they go about things, but very successful programs like Michigan, like Alabama, they all have a secret formula, a secret sauce that they all use. They put their own little taste on it, and that's what Michigan has here. Very regimented, physicality, work, blue collar. Involved.
Before the 98 national championship, Michigan's national champions were so far in the past, right? They were in black and white clips. And the program was great under Bo, but they never won a national championship. And then, Charles Woodson, Brian Griese came in and led this team back to the national championship. But even that was 98, right? It was, 20 some years before it happened again. It's interesting to see how the people in this program are responding to a near national championship, a near term past national championship, and striving to repeat it, and I think that is really the culture that Jim has instilled, that even when they came up short versus TCU, it didn't break them. They came back and did it again. And to your point against Alabama, there was a calmness. There was this is what we're doing. This is what we're here for. This is who we are. And the biggest piece in that, the defense is great, no doubt, okay? But the biggest piece in that is the field general, and that's the quarterback. And that's what we need to see. It's interesting because, we've heard about it, from Chip Lindsey. Hey, Bryce needs to show it on the field, right? And again, we're going to get a chance in a few weeks in the spring game to see him on the field, in a practice situation. But I think the injury to Mikey Keene just kind of clicks up the pressure and the expectations that were already sky high for Bryce Underwood, again, coming in as a top recruit. And the expectations are very high on and off the field at the quarterback position at the University of Michigan. And that was set by J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah, and one more note about culture and kind of the wider, the sport in general. The reaction after the loss to TCU in the 2022 season, and all of a sudden, all those guys announced that they were coming back, and that there was an NIL push to make sure that guys were at least, motivated to stay in Ann Arbor when comparing, the allure of entering the draft and getting a contract. So financially, that move, the NIL shift gets a lot of focus as it's related to luring transfers away, right? And Michigan's going to play their spring game, and there's conversation about, do you want to show the younger talented guys, everybody's recruiting all the time, and your guys are going to get poached. And
No, we're playing it just because, I mean, one, it's a great opportunity for our players and our fans to be out there and see, just the team in general. Now, we're not going to run every single play and do every single thing, but it's a great opportunity, and especially for the guys that might not get the chance to play on the Big House on Saturdays as much as others. So it's a great opportunity for us, and everybody talks about the portal and all that, and we all know that regardless, you have to have a great relationship with your players regardless, and that's what we're going to do.
I like that Michigan is saying, listen, our job is to keep our own players, through our culture, and all of that is kind of wrapped up in that. And the 22 end, or the conclusion of the 22 season, really set the tone for the 2023 team. And Blake Corum announcing that there was unfinished business, he was coming back, and the goal was to win the national championship. They set the tone early, and they maintained that. And then another team in the Big Ten in 2024 had a very similar story, right? The Ohio State Buckeyes in 2023 invested a lot of money in NIL to not only add transfers, but to keep guys in their program that very easily could have entered the NFL draft. And they were loaded going into the 2024 season, between Georgia and Ohio State, preseason favorites. And eventually they found a way to get it done after almost imploding completely after losing to Michigan. So the same story of bringing your guys in through high school recruiting, developing those players in your system, in your culture, and adding, key players through the transfer portal, but more so minimizing the losses of key players in the transfer portal, and how NIL is all wrapped up in that. We've seen very similar stories now in the last 2 full seasons. And I don't think that the financial component of keeping your guys on campus is getting nearly the attention that it deserves, because it's played a huge role in the last 2 national titles in college football.
Well, and it's interesting too because we were talking to defensive line coach Lou Esposito, and he was talking about how they evaluate NIL players. And what's interesting is that the Michigan defense is so good right now. It is a pipeline to the NFL. And, we talked about this last podcast. You have Wink Martindale, who was recently in the NFL, right? Can talk to these players exactly how he ran an NFL defense. And then you have the recent coaches for Michigan who have gone to the NFL. So you kind of have a push-pull, right? You have guys in the building who have recently been in the NFL. You have guys who just left the building who are in the NFL. So Michigan is an attractor. Michigan's very healthy NIL money-wise, but also very healthy in preparing players for the NFL. So Lou Esposito was talking about how they evaluate players.
For sure. I mean, I think the biggest thing is, do they fit our system? We play a unique system. Like, our system is, we're going to build a run wall. You have to be stout inside. You have to hold good edges. And you have to have guys that have the ability to do that. There's some guys that play in gap and attack systems that are going to have a bunch of stats, and they're jumping up the field, and they're creating vertical lanes and horizontal lanes because it's gap and attack. That's not what we do here. We play an NFL style defense. Well, we're gonna hold the point. We're gonna be firm. We're gonna build a run wall, and those guys fit into our system. That's tape wise, and then you research obviously their background. Like, who are they as a person? Do they fit our culture?
And what's interesting is that in a way, Michigan is really looking at not only will you be successful here, but if you're successful here, you have a good chance of being successful in the NFL. So you are bringing players in who are looking at Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham and looking at the way they prepared.
I mean, just their routines, like what they did. Like they would come in on Tuesday night and we would talk pass rush plan, like at 9:30 at night. Like what they did, like, hey coach, I saw this. You know, this guy's giving away this. You know, every single time the tight end and the running back are outside the tackle, we're getting this run. Like the way they dissect, the way they know football, and then in game was second to none. And that happens because of their knowledge of their opponent and who they're playing, and then obviously how they take care of themselves. I think that's the biggest jump to the NFL. It's a longer season. Now, they have lucky because they played at Michigan, and Michigan goes deep into the season, and they're physical, and we practice hard, so they'll be good with that. It's just the things that they did that were unbelievable off the field were just their football one-on-one knowledge, knowing what they're seeing and how they're seeing it.
And wanting to get in that pipeline, right? And it's interesting because and so we talk about what happened last year. You kind of had struggles at the quarterback position, and you had struggles in the offensive line, and then you just send, two of your best defensive linemen to the NFL, right? So now you kind of look at Lou Esposito and you say, okay, well, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on you because, it's easy to come in and look good when you have two potentially first round draft picks, at your position. Well, how are you going to replenish that? How are you going to reload? So it's interesting because, in hearing Coach Esposito talk, he talks about them chasing Bryce Underwood.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to be, everyone taught you obviously have to beat a block, right? You got to beat the guy in front of you to get to the quarterback. But then when you get there, you have to be in athletic position to stay away from him. So how many times do you watch a football game and you see guys, they win on the edge and they're out of control and they miss the sack? So in reality, sometimes not hitting the quarterback, you have to be in athletic position at the point of contact to get away from him. And our guys are doing that. So you practice it that way. Now, if you're just taking the guys and running them away from the quarterback, you're building a bad habit. And Coach Moore, we don't do that here. There is a quick whistle, but we do not do that. And we know we got to, no matter who's in at quarterback, like that's the most important guy on the football field for us. If we have a quarterback that's upright and plays well, we normally win here. And that's what we do. And our guys, they have fun with it. They kind of go by Bryce and say some things, and he does the next play he'll come and throw a dime. So it's been good. It's been good competition. He's a special player.
But he had this great quote.
We have a lot of big bodies. I mean, if you go down Damon Payne's 315 pounds. Eno's 320 pounds. Ike's 315 pounds. Trey Pierce is 310 pounds. Benny's 300 pounds. Trey Williams 320 pounds. I mean, those six guys inside are all really, really big. And when you can do that, football's still a game of big people leaning on little people. And when you have to take somebody and move them where they don't want to go, sometimes if you're bigger, it's a little bit easier, especially later in the game. So we're excited about those guys. And then you still have, some of the freshmen that were here last year that are doing a good job too. So it's great competition. And I'm a big believer. Iron sharpens iron. Competition breeds success. So now it's, hey, you're not doing it right, the next guy in. So we've been really fortunate in the spring, and there's been great competition there.
Clint, we talked about this when Aiden Hutchinson left. There was a concern that when he and David Ajabo left, that there was going to be this drop-off in the defense. And while the names changed, the defense continued to ascend. And that is the perception that I have right now, that it sounds from talking to Coach Esposito that they have a number of great players in the room. And we heard Wink saying earlier in the year that they expect to have more depth than last year. And, when you have depth and you can rotate guys, the defense, has an opportunity to stay a very special group. And it's just interesting because listening to Coach Esposito, it does not sound like he's expecting any drop off. If anything, they're trying to get better, and that's the perception we got from Wink too. So it's just interesting that um, if you had a position group that you were going to lose two first round draft picks, right? You'd be super concerned. And I think back to how Michigan pretty much had to revamp their offensive line last year. And we saw all the offensive line kind of struggle to reform and refine its identity. And I think the other coach who kind of has a lot of focus on him this year is Grant Newsome, right? Listen, love Grant Newsome, but definitely the offensive line was an area of struggle last year. Michigan has rebuilt the quarterback room, and it seems like the defensive line room is well stocked. And I think the main focus is going to be how Grant rebuilds the offensive line and whether that is able to protect. It's going to be a new starter, whoever it is, right? And they're going to need some time back there to find their footing. So it's going to be. I think the offensive line is going to have a lot of attention on it this year.
Yeah, Grant Newsome's press availability was really, I think, interesting. His tone was that everybody was kind of wearing the poor performance last year. The coaches, the players, they know the standard, they know the expectations of the program, and nobody was writing 7-5 on their locker memo in the preseason. Everybody was disappointed with the performance that we saw from the whole team, and especially the execution up front on the offensive line. So he kind of acknowledged that up front and said that really he's got to do a better job of reminding his guys that it's still fun to play football on a day in and day out basis.
Sure, I think, and this kind of goes back to the question of looking introspectively, what I can do better, what I could have done better to help that group, and we just gotta have fun. Like, I think it's natural anytime you go through some adversity, and especially just like us coaches, it's been a while since anyone in that building had lost more than a game in a season. So all of a sudden now, you can get kind of that snowball effect where you're searching for answers, and let's try this, as opposed to just kind of taking a breath and just enjoying it. Like, I always kind of joke, like, I get to coach, they get to play. We play a kids game, like some of the 6-year-olds play out, at recess. And obviously, yes, there's bigger stakes to it. We all understand that, coaches, players, all of us. But at the end of the day, you have to have fun playing this game. And I think there were times last year where I didn't do good enough job of just letting them do that. Obviously, it comes from a good place. Just like you see a baseball, a major league hitter starts pressing, and all of a sudden now it just keeps getting worse and worse, as opposed to just kind of having that short memory and getting back to what got them to that point in the first place.
Even in the hardest times, and I think that kind of, it's a fine line, between that, what he's describing and what Jerome Moore adopted is the kind of the smash mentality of, just kind of enjoying being the bull in the china shop, enjoying the every snap, getting to kind of, be in the trenches and really, really moving guys around and establishing that physical presence. And when things were not going well last year, they kind of lost that, even though it was, there are guys with experience that have done it before, and so it is, I think he's really wise to point out that a lot of that is mental and psychological, and it's in your mindset. When you're feeling confident, and when you're kind of centered in that mentality, that smash mentality, then success comes from that. But you can't let the results or lack of success, kind of take away that identity where it all starts. And he's I think he's really going to step forward this year. I think Grant Newsome, and learn how to lead those guys, and to make sure that he's not only the X's and O's and the execution and cleaning up the video. I think he excels at that. He got a lot of praise from Jim Harbaugh for years. The last at least 2 or 3 seasons. Jim Harbaugh mentioned Grant Newsome's ability to diagnose plays and make recommendations from the box during game day. So it's not the film, it's not the X's and O's where Grant Newsome is going to develop. It's going to be uh, establishing leaders on the offensive line. It's a relatively young group, so the older guys that do end up in that top 5, guys like Crippen and El Hadi, are going to have to step forward and exemplify that smash mentality all the time, regardless of what's happening from play to play or in terms of results. So we'll see how that develops. I think that group, that room, that coach, the coaching staff, that those guys have the biggest role in terms of getting Michigan back to playing championship football. They've got to grow and develop even more so than the quarterback, because like you said, regardless of who actually wins the quarterback competition, they're going to be new. They're going to need the whole offense to kind of operate efficiently in order for them to be successful early on. So that starts with the offensive line. It starts with getting that really, really deep and talented running back room going, and then making some of the throws that Chip Lindsey wants to use vertically, making those easier to execute because people have to stack the box.
Yeah, and Grant, had a great, again during availability, Grant said something that was really, I think, obvious.
Tell our guys, and obviously Coach Moore on down, that the team will go as the lines go. So the offense line and the defensive line. That's any good team, I would argue. They got to be dominant up front, in the offense line and the defensive line. So it's something that's definitely never lost on me or our offensive line. So like I said, it's the balance of having fun, but I think that it kind of goes hand in hand of when you are that kind of dominant group and you have that swagger, to you, that confidence that hey, I have a bad rep or I have a bad period, I'm still that guy.
There's one line that I have a high degree of confidence in, and the offensive line, I need to see it.
I think you learn a lot about yourself, anytime you face adversity and, go through, it was a challenging year for us. So, forces you to kind of look at, hey, how can I be better so that I can help the guys, just make sure I'm doing everything I can possibly do to put the guys in the best position to succeed. So, obviously wish that we hadn't had to go through that, but I do think anytime you face that, it makes you stronger as a program, stronger as a coach.
So I liked what he said. And again, coaches have raved about what he does on the practice field, what he does preparing. I think that he gets a pass for last year because, again, there was so much, the room was so depleted. But I really want to see it this year. And, it's a place where, there was, heading into the national championship season, they would say that they were 8 or 9 deep at offensive line. And again, completely depleted. It didn't feel anywhere near that last year. And, used to say smash, and well, the defense was smashing, the offense was kind of smashed. Never really felt they were really dictating on the field that well. But again, we need to see it, right? Because, it's great to have Bryce, and it's great that he can run and do all those things, but he's going to need some time to get his feet underneath him, and that needs to be provided by the offensive line. So definitely, it was interesting because they gave us both Lou Esposito and Grant Newsome in the same press conference. And I went in thinking, wow, both these coaches, have big jobs ahead of them. I left, Coach Esposito feeling really good. And again, because you can see the bodies. We've been able to talk to some of the players. The defense has a reputation and a performance record, right? But you look at the offensive line, and again, huge drop off. That group needs to pick it up. And, I have a lot of confidence in Grant, and he said the right things. And, unfortunately, we're really not going to see a lot in the spring game as far as how good the offensive line is. They're going to be both quarterbacks are going to have saran wrap around them. There's not going to be a lot of hitting and a lot of rushing and everything towards them. We're not going to see a real bull rush, trying to go after them. But definitely an area that we're going to be focusing on, when the games start.
It definitely starts at that point, putting those guys together, the lines, and then both guys coming out and talking about football is kind of, as the lines go, the team goes. Football is still about big guys leaning on little guys, wearing guys down, right? That's the identity of the program that Sharon Moore wants to continue, from the Harbaugh era into his own program here in Michigan football under his leadership, and that's why those guys are out there. And it's what they want to hear. It's what we want to hear, and it's certainly what Sharon Moore wants them to be thinking about and talking about. And you said the most key thing is that's great. I'd much rather be hearing the right things than the wrong things, but we got to see it on the field. We got to see these guys do it well, and learn from their mistakes. Nobody's perfect. A high standard is not a perfection standard from my perspective, but I think they've got to learn from their mistakes. We can't see the same repeated problems over and over again. And both the coaching staff and the players have to adapt as things go in a game and go through the season. And that all kind of starts with the spring game, just to see how things are coming together. But really, we won't get a good feel for how the program has shifted and changed or revisited that identity until we get to the fall. So most of it is conjecture and trying to read the tea leaves here. So I'm glad that we're hearing the right culture kind of signifiers from the coaching staff.
So the other thing that hits me when we talk about Grant is that this is really a referendum and on Sharon. Okay, I mean, Sharon has been in charge of the offensive line since the 21 season, right? So when you're the offensive line coach, offensive coordinator, and you ascend to head coach, you kind of expect that he's going to take a special interest in the area that he just ran, right? So when they won the national championship, he took a lot of credit for leading that group and building that group. And now, and again, I was thinking this last year, it's like, wow, the group that is having the most trouble was the group that he was responsible for the last several seasons. And again, lots of reasons for that. You can't lose the amount of players that they did and not have a little bit of a drop off. But also it's okay, can you do it again? Right? And how much was the offensive line built by Jim Harbaugh helping recruit and the other guys helping to recruit? And what's interesting to me when I look back at last season is when Jim left, the defense was pretty much had to be rebuilt from the ground up, right? It seemed like the entire defensive staff left and went somewhere else. And Michigan has rebooted the defense, right? Wink Martindale came in, and that was part of some of the concern I had with Lou Esposito is I'm like, well, this amazing defensive line was really built by somebody else and recruited by somebody else. Well, he's come in, he's recruiting guys, he has the right attitude. The guys seem to be, responding to him. And what stayed the same was Sharon and Grant Newsome. So it's not a criticism, it's an observation of, okay, we need to see you rebuild another offensive line. And, again, I keep looking back at last season and, Clint, you and I have talked about it in the postseason podcast, with better quarterback play, a little bit better quarterback play and better play from the offensive line, more consistent play from the offensive line, Michigan wins 2 or 3 more games last year, right? And it's a woulda, coulda, shoulda, didn't. So you look back, and it's great to have this amazing recruit at quarterback, but you got to build a line around him. You got to do it. You got to, that's the next thing that we need to see. So, again, I think you and I are going to be talking about what happens on the offensive line and the defensive line. I feel really good what's happening on the defensive line. And it's interesting because, we got to speak to Edge Dominic Nichols. And what it's just funny to hear. And when I say funny, I don't mean ha ha. I mean, oh my gosh, it's inspiring to hear the attitude that the team has, right? And he talked about the momentum coming off at the end of last season.
We went to whooping Ohio State to whooping Alabama too. You just roll into the spring ball with that, and you go and feeling confident about yourself. And I mean, it's easy to make plays when you're confident. It's hard to make plays when you're not confident.
There is a swagger among the edge players, among the defense, and not only is there a swagger, and this goes back to the culture that we've talked about, is that there are people in the media. I don't want to say baiting, but asking legitimate questions about, did you really feel Michigan was playing complimentary football last year? Read between the lines, the offense let you guys down, right? And the defensive guys are like, nope, we're all one team. We don't point fingers. And what's amazing to me, and this is really the residue of the culture in the last couple years, is that when Michigan lost to TCU, a lesser team with a lesser culture could have just blown apart, okay? Could have just collapsed, crumbled, pointing fingers at, how the offense could have done better. But there was such a belief and such a confidence in JJ that, as you said, the guys came back, they had opportunities, they decided to take advantage of NIL, but they really wanted to come back and show everybody how good they were. So on lesser teams, okay, and I will tell you, even earlier in Jim Harbaugh's tenure here, but definitely in Rich Rod and Brady Hoke, you could see the team kind of fraying at the edges and guys being upset at and a little bit of pointing fingers back and forth. So what's interesting about hearing the defensive guys talk is that there's a high expectation on how good they're going to be. There's a high expectation on how they're going to continue being good. And there's no criticism of the offense last year. It's like, hey, we need to get back to where we need to be, and we're going to do that. The other interesting thing is, Dominic talked about the difference in visiting Michigan and Georgia as a recruit.
I visited a lot of schools during my recruiting process. I remember comparing this spring ball, because I was here when I was a recruit for their spring ball, and comparing it to Georgia's. And I mean, obviously Georgia at the time was also one of the best teams in the country, but this place is just different. It's just how they go about things. I mean, we're trained soldiers. This is what it feels like. I mean, we're going at it every day, how we should. And I mean, just building to win every game this season.
And just, one of the things that struck me is that as we're there for availability in the spring, you see the visitors coming in. Okay, we walk by the table and there's a whole stack of name tags on all these recruits who are coming in and their families. And one of the things that Dom said was, hey, I went to Michigan, I went to Georgia. It's different here. It's different. Guys need to see it. Okay. And obviously Georgia has had a high level of success. This isn't a shot at Georgia. It's just, it's different at Michigan, and it's not just a talking point.
Physicality, that was the biggest thing, I mean, it's not normal to go somewhere and just see the Beat Ohio drill, the sirens going off, and dudes just getting ready to hit for 3 hours, Like, most schools just don't do that, trying to save guys. I mean, you could say we're trying to save guys. We got time to get healthy. We can go ahead and bang in the spring. That's how it should be.
You saw that pay off in the season last year with all the guys.
Yeah, for sure. Our D-line, due to seeing Mason Graham and KG, just like Jay Stu, just those guys really ball out. It was great to see.
We had, Jimmy Rolder come in, right? And, they were saying, hey, you've played a lot, but you've also been buried in the depth chart. You've had great players ahead of you. Hey, did you think about leaving? And he's just like,
I love Michigan. I came here for a reason, and I think everything happens for a reason. And staying here, staying the course, I think will turn out to be it.
and you hear that a lot from guys at every level, Clint. There is a there is a love for the camaraderie in the locker room. There's a brotherhood. Um, there is um, a belief that they're going to succeed. And like I said, I keep talking about what happened versus TCU because I was disappointed. I know you were disappointed, shocked, surprised, right?
Hmm.
But but these guys were unshaken. Okay, they came back, and you were talking about what happened versus Alabama in the Rose Bowl. They didn't come back to lose, and it's easy to say that in retrospect, but that's when you would talk to the guys, and I'm thinking specifically of like Blake Corum. It was like it was predetermined they were going to win. Okay, there was a belief, there was an unshakable belief that these guys were going to keep it together and JJ was going to lead them. And when we talk about JJ kind of and Blake and that team kind of, it's not overshadowing what's going now. It's an inspiration. That mindset is still here. So it's going to be interesting. Um, again, it's of course as loving Michigan and loving football in general, you love to see a team with this kind of attitude from top to bottom. And I sure hope it works out. And it's as somebody who takes an interest in culture and coaching and teamwork, to see this mentality continue, even after, let's be honest, a really disappointing last season. And again, I wonder um, if that's one of the attractor to recruits and NIL and getting the top recruit is that there is a belief that this team's going to get it done, that this group is going to continue to get it done, and I'm interested to see how it's going to turn out.
Yeah, I went back and looked at the 2021 offensive line, the first one that won the Joe Moore Award. And as I was kind of looking at that roster, I saw, Gio El and Greg Crippen were freshmen on that team in 2021, which means their Michigan career started in 21, which means they only knew beating Ohio State. They only knew, relative success. And while they, of course, knew about the 2020 season and some of the trials before that, certainly the struggles against Ohio State, they didn't feel it as a team and as players in the locker room and in the building. So last year for them, 2024 is really their first taste of that kind of program adversity. And I think it's going to be incumbent on those two guys, especially, but guys that age of fifth year seniors stepping into leadership roles. And, it's one thing to say that 7-5 is unacceptable. Of course, we expect them to say that, but we expect those words to be followed by a lot of hard work and activity that produces results on the field. And it's going to be on those guys and the coaches to kind of lead that, to forge that path and to lead the guys down there. That's what guys like JJ McCarthy and Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards did. They said it early on, and we were all kind of in awe of their leadership abilities and their positive spirit. And then they backed it up with the hard work and the results that kind of made it turn those guys into legends. And this kind of turnaround from a 7-5 season is going to have a similar flavor, but this is the adversity that they have to bounce back from. And, we're going to see who steps into those leadership roles. It's going to have to be the guys that know the pain of losing those games last year, losing at Washington when they shouldn't have, losing at Illinois when they shouldn't have, playing really poorly. not putting their best foot forward against Texas in their first nationally televised game and kind of feeling that sting of a loss at home. Those are the types of things that they have to, use as motivation and kind of lead those guys out of the wilderness. So that's what matters, especially in the spring, is establishing those leadership connections. And I hope that's what Grant Newsome is seeing in that offensive line room.
Clint, I talk a lot about we hear players say things, and I refer to it as chicken soup for the Michigan fan soul. And just in the last couple of weeks, we had Rayshawn Benny, and you were talking about Ohio State, and there was a question about, well, the team kind of pulled it together at the end, and he said this.
Well, the end of the season, will come at the end of the season every year. Ohio State, it's really just like the guys in the building, like we know will come with it. Like the focus is up, the intent is up. Not to say that we're not focused, it's just like everybody know that this is the week we've been waiting for all year. So it's just like we all just gelled at the right time.
You hear the players talking about the, what it's like, to be at Michigan, and, tight end Marlon Klein.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that go into it, just, not just the stuff on the field, but it's, most importantly, the stuff off the field, creating those relationships with your teammates, younger guys, transfers, guys that have been to other places, and really, don't know the Michigan way yet. Really just teaching those guys how we do things around here, and they all have done a really great job with that, and so yeah, it's been fun.
And, there have been a lot of questions about what is the offense going to be like under Chip Lindsey and under Bryce.
I mean, we're Michigan. We're still going to run the ball, and, that's kind of, we take pride in running the ball and being the most physical team in whatever stadium we're playing in.
First, being fans and loving great football, you hear the players, talking about this. You hear, how Lou Esposito is talking about, how great this defense is going to be.
You feel really, really good. It'll be more of waves than it'll be, hey, we're going to ride these guys out and let them play as long as they can, then put you in for a little bit. And then when they're back, we put them in. I mean, we're being very systematic in how we do our rotations. I tell them all the time they're all starters. Depending on what period you watch, one group will be in with the ones and the next group is in 3 plays later. And that's how we're going to have to train those guys. And one, it gives guys a bunch of reps. And two, you starting to see combinations happen. Because just like you talk about an offensive line, you got to have 5 guys gelling. You got to have those guys up front, whether we're playing 4 down linemen or 5 down linemen, you got to have those guys knowing who they're playing against, or playing with, rather. And those guys have been doing a great job of that. So we're excited about it.
And then you got Barham, right, who, everybody's raving about, and Esposito says is going to be one of the best players in the country.
I mean, the beauty of this defense, and I said it was like, because Coach Wink talks about it all the time, it's a positionless defense. So because he's walked down on the edge of play, that doesn't mean he's playing end. It's just in that set. If you watch how many different fronts and how many different looks we do, it's complicated for the offense, but it's easy for us. It's just a word. And now he's walked down or he's rushing from here. I mean, he's one of the best players in the country. There's no doubt about it. He might be the most physical player I've ever been around. And he is going to do the things that he does as many times as we can. Because again, it's always been and always will be about the players. So put them in positions that they do things really well and do that as many times as you can. And that's what we're going to do with them.
I'm not expecting the defense to miss a beat, okay? And why do I believe that? Because I've seen it the last 3 or 4 years. So when I hear about those, the people on the defense raving about Bryce, okay? And when I think that I do expect the offense to get better. Listen, they didn't win that award for the best offensive line 2 years in a row by mistake, okay? That didn't happen in spite of Sharon. It didn't happen in spite of Grant. I'm looking to see it happen again, okay? And, if Michigan's defense can hold the line the way they have, which I fully expect, and the offense can catch gear, I think we're going to have another run here of very special seasons to be a Michigan football fan. I'm really excited to see it. Um, and, as much as I will miss, some of the players and specifically, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, those guys were amazing to watch. And, even though we didn't get to see Will Johnson play a lot last year, he was still amazing to watch when he did. You know, one of the funny things is um, apparently they were giving Mikey Keene some grief about Will Johnson getting the pick six on him. And, I thought that was, you know, it's just funny that you see these guys, they can give each other a little bit of grief and a little bit of ribbing, right? And, it's funny that, Marlon Klein was telling him that, he had fun reminding Mikey Keene about that.
I watched Will Johnson sprint out, pass me on our sideline for that. Yeah, that's about it.
This team has all the earmarks of gelling. And again, just, and Clint, I think back to heading into that Ohio State game that week last year, how the cloud that seemed to be over this program, and how when you talk to the players and you talk to Sharon, they all believed it was unshakable, right? And I thought, and people can check the receipts, I thought Michigan was going to beat Ohio State. I say this, we own Ohio State until they prove otherwise. But the cloud over the program, it sure didn't, a lot of people didn't feel that way. So you had Michigan having that huge win down in Columbus and me dodging pepper spray on the field afterward. And then Bryce Underwood, being locked up as a recruit. And then Michigan beating Alabama with, 4 first-round starters out of the lineup, right? Just how quickly the perception of the program is trending up and pivoted. And I'm really excited about, the spring game in a few weeks and really excited about where this program is heading.
Yeah, there's still one guy kind of looming under the radar, and I don't know if he's going to play in the spring game. I would guess that he won't, but having Rod Moore back in the secondary for this upcoming season is even by us right now, kind of under discussed, and he's kind of flying under the radar, and he checks all of these boxes that we've talked about to this point, about culture, about results on the field, stepping in, as a contributor early in his career as a freshman, been through the ups and downs. It was a freshman in 2021 and has been to the very top of the mountain and has seen us when we're struggling, had to sit out an entire year, made a decision to come back. If there's a guy that kind of steps into that leadership role in the locker room, that would be my guess right now for who that's going to be is Rod Moore. And I don't know. I would imagine that we're not going to see much of him during the spring game, but by the time we get to the fall, that's going to be the guy we're talking about. And in terms of reasons for really, really overwhelming optimism, getting that guy back on a defense that, as you said, I don't expect to miss a beat despite sending so many guys to the NFL. That makes you really excited for what this team could be have the capability to accomplish.
I'm really excited to see Rod Moore back. Clint, I know I've told you this story. I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, but I talked to him right before the beginning of the national championship team. I bumped into him in the tunnel as he was stretching out before the game and, briefly spoke with him. And he's just a player of such focus. And I have such high hopes for him returning to a high level. And again, just an incredible leader. By all accounts, he was basically an on-field coach last year or a player coach, encouraging everybody as he was working through his rehab. So I would like nothing better to see him for him personally return. So again, a great guy, and just would be incredible when we see him back on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the UMGoBlue.com podcast. This is Phil Callihan along with
Clint Derringer.
Go Blue.
Go Blue.
Well, I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing, and Coach Wink says it all the time, it's the game's always has been and always will be about the players, right? So we were fortunate to have two really, really elite, unbelievable players in the D tackle room, and then you had Josiah Stewart in there. Like, that front was really good. The exciting part of it is we have some really good players coming back, and we've added some really good players. And then the other thing is, like, some of these young guys that are in the system that have been here a year are starting really, really to get special and be the players that we thought they were going to be. So I'm excited about it. Every day they get better, especially nowadays with football. So many freshmen come in early. So, like, the freshmen, you're starting to see the biggest jump. We had practice 6, so we're almost halfway through, and they're starting to get it. And you start to see those guys playing. And then the new guys now, okay, they've been in the system. It's practice 6. We've been running the same calls for a couple days now, and it's been really good to watch those guys play at a high level.
Thank you for listening to the UMGoBlue.com podcast. All rights reserved.